assuming the cap rate or the multiple in that business stays the same, if you can double your net operating income, you can double the value of that business.
Welcome to the Freedom Point Real Estate Podcast, where we talk about creating more time freedom through passive real estate investing. Passive investing in real estate challenges conventional investment wisdom. We are passionate about learning and sharing resources with others who are ready to transform their investing mindset. Quick disclaimer as always, I am not a CPA, I am not an attorney or a financial advisor. This is not financial advice, not telling you or anyone else what to do. The views and opinions expressed in these podcasts are provided for education and informational purposes only and are not necessarily the views of my employer, ADP. I'm glad you're here. Now let's dig in.
All right, welcome back, Freedom Point podcast listeners, to another great episode. Thank you for joining us today. For those of you that maybe just started listening to our podcast, I appreciate you doing that. I'm getting a lot of feedback from people these days that have said that they're starting to binge watch or binge listen to our podcast. So if you're a fan of Netflix and some of these other streaming stations and whatnot out there, certainly consider binge listening to Freedom Point podcast episodes from the past. Feel free to give us a rating and review. We really appreciate that. We want to push as much of this great content out to our listening audience as possible. Without further ado, I have a wonderful guest with me today, Chris Larsen. Chris, welcome to the show.
Jeremy, I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for jumping in here. Really appreciate it. Bit of a background on Chris. He is the founder and principal of Next Level Income. Chris has been investing in and managing real estate for over 20 years. While in college, he bought his first rental property at the ripe old age of 21 years of age. From there, he expanded into development, private lending, buying distressed debt, as well as commercial offices, and ultimately now syndicating commercial properties. He began syndicating deals in 2016 and has been actively involved in, get this, over $1 billion of real estate acquisitions. He's passionate about helping investors learn more about the passive benefits of real estate investing. Again, Chris, welcome to the show.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. And that's the double-edged sword. You know, as experience grows, your age also grows, it seems. So you say 21. Every time I hear it, it gets a little bit further away from where it was yesterday.
That's right. Well, I think we're similar in terms of our age-wise, but for those that are listening versus watching this, Chris has an amazing, luscious beard that we talked about prior to starting the podcast episode today. So if you haven't already, head over to YouTube, check us out over there, and you can take a look at Chris's luscious beard that he's been growing. So
I think that's officially the first time it's been called luscious. So I'm gonna remember that. I'm gonna see if I can. I have to have my wife listen to this episode for sure.
There you go. And for our listening audience, we'll put the luscious beard in the show notes. So without further ado, we could go on all day. Why don't you kind of tell the listening audience a little bit more about what you're doing today and what you're kind of up to?
Well, as soon as we hop off, I'm going to go look for sponsors for my beard and different products that are out there. But no, in all seriousness, Jeremy, we've been involved in a lot of stuff. I started in the residential space when I was 21 years old, and it is, you know, if people read my book, and I'll share with you how to get a free copy if you're listening today. But I went to college. I just wanted to race my bike, so I went to Virginia Tech. Actually, I got a biomechanical engineering degree, which was one of the hardest things I've ever done. It was much harder than I thought it would be. But you know, it's interesting. You go from high school, you move into college. You know, the level gets higher and higher, and you realize, you know, you may be the smartest kid in the row or the classroom in high school, and you know, in some cases, I was the dumbest kid in the class in these classes in college. I'll never forget. I was in a 3,000 or 4,000 level math class, and the teacher made a joke, and I was the only one that didn't laugh. And I was like, I'm a pretty funny guy. I'm a pretty smart guy, and I'm like looking around. I was like, I don't belong here. But you know, it taught me, you know, how to you know, get along and get through challenges and be around smarter people. I ended up going and spending a career in the biomedical device space, the medical device arena. And I did that because I bought that first property at 21. I started buying more properties, and I needed more capital to invest. So my goal was to figure out a career, figure out something I could do to become as accredited as quickly as possible. And the reason that I took those steps, Jeremy, is because while I was racing in between my freshman and my sophomore years of college, my best friend, my training partner, my college roommate, he passed away. He had a massive brain hemorrhage. I raced another year. I came back to school. I thought, this is silly. Like, I'm riding my bike around in circles. There's got to be more to life than this. And I don't want to live with regrets. I don't want to die with regrets. I want to honor the life that I was given, and I wanted to honor the life of my friend that didn't have his life anymore. And through, a lot of thinking and praying and thought, and a lot of that during those bike rides that were very therapeutic, I said, you know what? I need to be financially independent. I need to have the ability to do these things. And that's what drove me to read over 250 books. I got an M.B.A. in portfolio management and develop what ultimately was my strategy for financial independence, which was investing in real estate.
Yeah, obviously, sorry to hear about your friend. I know a lot of people listening to this today have had, similar experiences. Life is short, right?
Yeah,
and I continue to remind myself now that I'm in my mid 40s, the clock is ticking. And the reality is the clock is ticking for everybody, right?
Absolutely.
And so that's one of the main drivers to why, I myself also read 250 books, listened to a bunch of podcasts, and just kind of absorbed myself, into the strategy. So, now that you have pivoted to investing in cash flowing businesses, what are some of the asset classes that you've invested in the past, and what are some of those investment opportunities or classes that you're looking to expand into in the future?
Yeah, great question. So again, and I'll share it with you now. If you want a copy of the book, I'm going to keep referencing it here. So you can go to nextlevelincome.com, click on the book link, and not only can you download a copy, I'll send you a copy for free if you put your address in. But the book is written about the value add strategy, Jeremy, and the value add strategy is something that Benjamin Graham, Warren Buffett's mentor, taught him, and that was the strategy that I sought out. So originally, I went from residential real estate to multifamily real estate. That was what our first commercial investments were in as LPs over 10 years ago. And that was ultimately what our first syndications were in. And that's still the majority of our portfolio. So multifamily syndications are apartments, self-storage, car washes, mobile home parks, and we got a couple things that we can talk about, what I think will be outperformers in the future. But if you look across all of those, what do they have in common? They have cash flow. And what's interesting is, if you're listening, you're a business owner or you own real estate, you'll understand this as well. The value of commercial real estate is valued very similar to the value of a business. It's valued on net operating income, which is very similar to EBITDA, which is what we measure in the car wash space. So if you can increase the NOI, the net operating income, or the EBITDA of a property or a business, you can increase the value of the business. So we like to buy value add properties that are stable, they have cash flow today. We can improve operations, we can improve revenues, we can drive the value up over a period of time. We can sell, refinance, we can rinse and repeat. And this works in multifamily, it works in mobile home parks, it works in self-storage. Yes, it works in car washes, which are a little bit more complicated from a business model. But the reason we moved from pure real estate to some of these cash flow businesses is because as cap rates have fallen, as asset prices have gone up, the cash flow has decreased, especially with interest rates going up. So this allows not only us, but also our investors to get higher cash flows from their investments and also diversification. As I feel we get further into this real estate cycle, I think there are going to be better values.
Yeah, that's great. And thank you for the plug, by the way, on your book, Next Level Income. I was going to ask you about that towards the end, but thanks for bringing that out to the front. That's a great book. I have read that book myself. So for passive investors that are looking to invest passively into real estate, maybe you've only done it actively. Maybe, your friend Brad told you about the strategy. Highly recommend that you check out Chris Larsen's Next Level Income book. You mentioned a lot of things. You talked about cash flow and diversification. You talked about, how valuations are determined, when some of these opportunities go full cycle. So can you give my listening audience just a little bit more information about, how exactly does an operator step into a distressed asset or an asset that has a value add play? what is kind of the strategy around increasing that ROI? And then how does increasing that ROI have a direct correlation on what the exit price is that the operator can ultimately achieve when that deal goes full cycle?
Yeah, absolutely. And look, there's a lot of pieces to the puzzle, right? And there's multiple things you have to consider before you buy a property. But let's assume you buy a property or a business and you buy it at a fair price. You buy it at a price that is reasonable. You have reasonable loan to value. You have a reasonable interest rate. You have reserves. So these are some of the things that are really key. You want to have solid loan to value, like low enough that you're not over leveraged. Two, you want to have positive cash flows. You want to have ample reserves as well. So you have to make sure you have, all of these things. So assuming you have all that, now it comes down to operations. So, it's sexy, it's exciting to look at an investment and go buy a property or a business, but where the rubber meets the road is what's happening day to day in that property or that business. So how do you increase NOI? It's a simple equation. It's lowering operational costs. It's increasing revenues or sales that are coming in. And the difference in those is net operating income. So if you have a good operating team, whether that's in the apartment space or the car wash space or whatever business that you may be in, then it comes down to, and this is where my background for 20 years in the medical device industry was in sales. It was, how do you go out and increase revenues? How do you put a plan together? How do you put a team together? Ultimately, how do you go and do that? So again, it's easy to talk about. It's hard to do, a lot of times. And a lot of times operations are different than sales, right? So you have to have the right people on the team and you have to have the right people in the right place on that team. But what's cool is if you can double your net operating income, assuming the cap rate or the multiple in that business stays the same, you can double the value of that business. Now think about, if you're listening and you've invested in residential real estate, you buy a piece of property and you look at your neighbor on the left and you look at your neighbor on the right. And if your neighbor on the left's house is worth $300 per square foot and the neighbor on your right is worth $400 a square foot, yours is probably worth about $350 a square foot. You can do all kinds of stuff to that house. You can, fix up the kitchen. You can put in a pool. Maybe it'll get closer to that $400 a square foot, but there's only so high it can go. And residential prices go up. They also go down, as we saw during the last financial crisis. And that goes all the way back into the 1850s. We can talk about the real estate cycle too. But you don't really have much control over the value of a piece of residential property that's valued on comparable sales. When you own a piece of commercial property, the nice thing is if you have an operating team that knows what they're doing, you have a plan to increase revenues, rents, then you can actually control the value of that property to a large degree. And what does that mean? So if you're an investor, if you have reasonable loan to value, if you have a reasonable interest rate, and you have good rents or good revenues coming in, that means you should have cash flow from day one. So here you have an asset, it's putting out cash flow. By the way, you probably have depreciation too, which is offsetting your cash flow, which means you may not be paying taxes on that income. And then 3, 4, 5 years down the road, as this value has increased in value because you've increased the net operating income, you can sell it. And then what's neat is you can actually leverage the sale and those additional proceeds through what's called a 1031. And you can buy a larger property, a more expensive property or business in some circumstances. And you can do it all over again. And if you don't touch that capital, a lot of times you can avoid paying taxes, or I should say prolong paying taxes for a far into the future. And look, this is the secret of the rich, right? They don't spend their capital, they spend their income that's being spun off of that. They use life insurance. We're big proponents of cash value life insurance. They use life insurance to leverage. They use their properties to leverage, their businesses, their assets to leverage. And then they create revenue from their assets to live off of. And then they let that capital grow and grow and grow. And they prolong paying taxes. And if you don't have to pay taxes, your capital grows that much faster. It's my mother-in-law says it's so great that you know about all these things, but really it's a game. And if you know the game, if you know how it works, just like Monopoly on the front of my book, then you can perform that much better at it, right?
Chris, it's a beautiful thing. And I'm going to take this, I think, out of your book. I believe you called the strategy the Holy Grail.
Yes, I did. And look, to be fair, I stole that from Ray Dalio. And, again, going back to, look, I'm a nerd. I'll prove it. I was in math club. I was in the marching band. I played multiple instruments. Racing bicycles is not the coolest thing in the world, especially when you're shaving your legs at 15. And in my free time, I juggled with my friends. So if that's not a nerd, I don't know what is. But what that got me was, from an analytical perspective, I love numbers. I love to figure out how to do these things. And if you look and you can figure out how to increase your returns and decrease your risk, that's what Ray Dalio calls the Holy Grail. And if you look at what we've been talking about, Jeremy, ultimately what you're doing is you're figuring out ways to generate better returns in your portfolio. And if you're doing it in a very tax efficient manner and you have some control over it, you're minimizing your risk and you're kind of decreasing the range with which your returns come in. And if you have that lack of volatility like we see in the stock market, what that gets you is actually get you better returns over time.
Chris, I would like to test how big of a nerd you are.
Uh-oh.
Okay. Can you explain to my listening audience what the terms infinite banking mean?
Okay. So what's interesting is the infinite banking concept. It's neither infinite nor banking, really. But what it talks about is the use of cash value life insurance. And I'm actually a licensed life insurance agent. I was licensed with State Farm over 20 years ago. I got relicensed during COVID because I guess I needed something to do when we weren't doing surgeries in our med device business and we weren't collecting rents in our apartments, and it was a scary time. But I bring that up because what we did is we actually used the cash value in our life insurance to pull out and make sure we had a safety net. And that might surprise people. So infinite banking is the concept of basically taking cash value life insurance, overfunding it or max funding it to the point where you increase the cash value, you actually decrease the insurance. And then what we advocate is we actually advocate a strategy, what we call our investment optimizer, where you can use that cash value to invest in cash flow real estate or cash flow assets to kind of multiply the effect on that. But the reason it's called infinite banking is because you can actually create the same structure yourself with life insurance that a bank does. And what that is the ability to have an asset and a liability, and you own both sides of it. So what that means is, and this is how you become the bank. So what that means is if you own the cash flow, if you own cash value in your life insurance policy, we can dive really deep into this, and you take a loan out, who do you own the loan back to? You own it back to yourself. So you have both the asset and you have the liability. So if you have both the asset and the liability, you are now the bank yourself. And that's kind of where the banking portion of that comes in. But if you do it the right way and you structure it the right way, it can go on, just like we talked about real estate, it can go on into infinity because you can take the proceeds, you can create generational wealth for your family in a very tax efficient way.
Is the practical nature then of using life insurance dollars then to take those dollars out of the life insurance policy, effectively loan it to yourself, and then deploy that capital into a cash flowing real estate asset?
So let's take a step back, and I'll even break it down a step further. So if you're familiar with real estate, you understand cash value life insurance. If you buy a house, let's say, Jeremy, you're like, I'm looking at this house to buy. We drive down the road together. It's a $500,000 house. You say, I'm going to buy this house, put $100,000 down. You put 20% down, you own $400,000, right? You're fortunate, and that house goes up in value 5% every year, right? So the law of 72, you're less than 15 years in the future, right? You happen to get a 15-year mortgage, you paid off that house. Well, that house went from $500,000 to $1 million in value. You only put $100,000 down. Now it's paid off, and you own $1 million asset. So your increase in value is $900,000. So it's just like life insurance. Over time, if you have traditional life insurance, you pay the premium, the cash value goes up. At some point, you don't pay the premium anymore. And actually, if you live long enough, the life insurance company will write you a check for the value of that life insurance. But here's why it's also like real estate. At any time, that home you have, you can probably get a line of credit. You can get a HELOC. You can borrow that money out. And if you're listening, some of you may have done this and taken the money that you borrowed from that main property and bought a second property if it made sense. You can do the exact same thing with a life insurance. But what's cool is you're taking a loan essentially from yourself and paying yourself back. So It's a very powerful strategy. Again, having a father that died at I had a father that died at age 41 when I was 5 years old. I'm very aware that life is short. We talked about my friend, but also my father. It made me think, hey, I need to have protection for my family set up. And when I learned about this strategy and how I could actually put money into the strategy and still use that money and invest in another strategy, I was like, this is brilliant. Let me add one thing. Some people may be listening and say, that's silly. Why would I borrow money from myself and pay an interest rate to do that? Insurance actually has a rate of return. It has a guaranteed rate of return in it. So remember, you own the asset and the liability. So let's say you're paying 5%, but you're making 5%. You may think, okay, it's a wash. It's actually not a wash, because just like that home, you're paying interest and you're paying down the loan in a straight line fashion. But that house, it compounded from $500,000 to $1 million. Your money in your insurance policy is actually compounding. So even if you're borrowing at 5% and paying 5%, you're actually making money. It's arbitrage, pure and simple.
Yeah. So you're kind of benefiting in a couple of ways, as you were explaining, through the amortization, schedule.
Yep.
In addition to that, I would presume, correct me if I'm wrong, but you also get the depreciation benefits, correct?
So with life insurance, it's kind of like a Roth IRA. So you kind of get one or the other. So if you want the tax benefits, then you got to pay tax when that insurance policy pays off. So what we do is we actually use after-tax money to pay the premiums on our life insurance. And that means we can take the money out in a tax-free fashion if it's a loan, just like a line of credit, a HELOC line of credit. But then even more importantly, our heirs will get the proceeds of that life insurance tax-free. And again, when you're talking about 7-8-figure life insurance policies, that can be a significant amount of savings.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's talk a little bit about the hat you're wearing. It has the name Hurricane Car Washes on it. So tell me a little bit more about that asset class, which I know you've personally invested into in the past. I personally have not. I'm in 27 LP investments myself in multiple different asset classes, but none in the car wash space. So tell the listening audience a little bit more about that space and why you think it's a good investment.
Yeah. So look, first off, everybody has to make decisions on their own. So if you're listening, you're like, well, hey, should I invest in this space, Chris? You got to make the choice for yourself. We built a portfolio of cash flowing assets in multifamily, self-storage, mobile home parks. But we also I've always liked businesses. And I almost bought a car wash with my uncle many years ago, about not quite 10 years ago. So did a lot of research into it. And I had some coaching clients that had car washes. So I got to learn a lot about it. And then we actually bought a small car wash here locally in Asheville, North Carolina. And it's got a great rate of return. We bought it from a friend, and I bought it from another friend that needed to sell it quickly. But when my partner called and said, hey, Chris, we're looking at expanding into car washes, I immediately said, I'm in. And the reason is car washes have a lot of the same features that we talked about with value add real estate, Jeremy, which is, they can have high cash flow. They have the ability to increase net operating income. They have the ability to actually sell at a lower cap rate or a higher multiple of EBITDA in this case, if you pull them together. So if you think about it, we're a membership model, and a private equity group or a large group that runs car washes, they're going to pay more for a portfolio. They're going to pay more for an individual wash in a large portfolio than they would from a single wash, because they're getting more bang for their buck when they go buy a portfolio. So cash flow, ability to create appreciation, ability to sell at a higher valuation is very nice. But then they actually have higher depreciation than any of the types of real estate that we talked about before.
And why is that?
You took the question right out of my mouth. So some of you may be thinking, why is that? And Jeremy, you just said that. The reason is the way the tax law is written, a lot of the equipment is business equipment. So, you have a building, but that building is purpose driven. You have the equipment in there. Now, the downside is you depreciate it quickly, but you also have to replace it, a lot quicker than you would, say a building and that sort of thing. But it's pretty great if you can have, 50, 75%, even 100% year one depreciation when you look at leverage in a lot of cases with these washes. So if depreciation is an important part of your consideration when you look at investments, car washes have that. So all those things combined, we typically see higher cash flow and higher total returns on the order of 50 to 100% compared to, some of these, more stalwart real estate classes like multifamily and self-storage.
Are you typically looking to invest into car washes where you're buying existing car wash facilities from maybe mom and pop owners, or are these mostly ground up, or a combination of the two?
Great question. So we're agnostic. So we would prefer to buy a stabilized wash that we can go in and improve operations and do that. That's going to lower our risk, right? But in some areas, it's actually more economically advantageous for us to develop or do that. Or we just closed on a brand new location, as a matter of fact, for our portfolio. And actually, the owner was building, and he knew that we had a piece of property that we bought locally to develop. And he came to us and said, "Do you just want to buy the wash that I'm building?" Because he didn't want to compete with us. So in that case, it can be advantageous to do that as well. And that's the long answer. The short answer is it depends.
Right. Yep. It always depends because there's no crystal balls out there, and there's multiple different, strategies that investors use to ensure that they're, preventing from some of that potential downside risk, of the opportunity, not only protecting their own investment, but also ultimately protecting, their investors' money, because that's a significant fiduciary responsibility that they carry. So
Absolutely.
Couple last questions for you, if you're ready to go.
Always.
What are one or two ways that Chris uses his talents to give back to others?
Yeah. So one of my passions is, look, our website, Next Level Income, our business was founded on helping people become financially independent through not just opportunities, but education first. And we're very passionate about teaching the next generation. So we started a financial literacy class here with a local nonprofit. If you have kids, check out nextlevelincome.com/kids. We got 5 tips on how to become money pros. And then I've been active. I've been racing bicycles for 30 years on and off. I also coach my son's cycling team. And I'll tell you what, it's we usually coach the team on Wednesday afternoons. And it's usually the highlight of my week to see the joy on these kids' faces. So, riding a bike, you see that picture of Einstein riding around with the smile on his face with his wind blowing, or the wind blowing in his hair. It's a special thing to be able to share that with the next generation as well.
Yeah, that's great. For most of those that are listening to this, they're also aware that I coach kids too, but certainly not in the area of cycling, but in the area of hockey. So at the time of this recording, it's the beginning of October, and the beginning of October means the beginning of hockey season. So my evenings and weekends are going to be largely on the ice with kids that are from ages 10 to 16.
I love it. And I married a Canadian. So as soon as I heard you speak, Jeremy, I was like, this guy's probably up north in hockey territory. And then my boys play lacrosse, which is kind of similar to hockey in a lot of ways. What did Wayne Gretzky say? He said, "I tried lacrosse, but it was too crazy and too physical. So I went back to hockey." So
hockey's a very physical sport, but I would argue with somebody all day that lacrosse is even more physical.
Yeah, just don't. So but great. You got those. Yeah, it is. They're both. I always enjoyed watching hockey. So
yeah, good. What is one outside of Next Level Income? Yeah. What is maybe one or two other books, or maybe even podcasts that you would recommend to the listening audience if they're looking to learn more about passive real estate investing?
Yeah, so I appreciate you offering my book, and get a free copy at nextlevelincome.com. Let me share something that may be a little bit outside of the scope of that question. I kind of alluded to this earlier. I alluded to the real estate cycle. This is like my real estate Bible. You can see it's about as thick as the Bible too. It's called The Secret Life of Real Estate and Banking. And this book talks about real estate cycles. It talks about credit creation and how you can use the real estate cycle to your advantage. So before you go and invest, I would suggest checking out this. It's by Phil Anderson, and his partner Akil Patel just came out with a book called The Secret Wealth Advantage, which is also a great read. And look, if you understand the real estate cycle and credit creation, you can figure out what types of real estate are going to perform best during different areas of the cycle. And that's going to make you a more successful investor.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been saying that for a long time, that there's opportunities to invest into real estate in any 4 of the major, stages in the economic cycle. So Appreciate you recommending that book. We'll make sure to get that in the show notes as well. Yeah. What is one next bucket list item that you'd like to personally check off?
Yeah. So where are we here? I'm always looking for things. One of my favorites was rafting down the Grand Canyon, which is why I have that picture behind me here. But I've been doing a lot of stuff with my boys lately. They're 11 and 13. So, we're on track to visit at least one national park every year. So we went to Acadia. We just got back from Acadia when I started growing this beer, as we were talking about. And then my wife and I are heading out to California here shortly. So I'm always looking forward to the next family trip with my boys and visiting another family park or another national park.
That's great. Well, when we jump off here, I'll give you some recommendations on some national parks to visit if you're not very familiar out in the California area. So
can't wait.
Chris, thank you. Outside of several of the ways that you talked about, my listening audience being able to engage with you, are there any other ways that you'd like to let us know on how we can learn more about Chris Larsen and what you're up to?
Sure. Yeah. First off, if you want to get, if you're on your journey, you want to get some free resources, the book is free, nextlevelincome.com. Click on the book link. The podcast is free. The blog is free. We have a course online. You can get a nice discount. If you use the code NEXTLEVEL, all caps, it's $500 off the course, which is also on the website. And then if you say, hey, what are you doing in the world of investing? Click on the invest link and you can schedule a call with our team, learn more about what we're doing in multifamily, self-storage, mobile home parks, car washes, and we're soon to launch our senior housing fund as well.
Chris, well, this has been a joy. I appreciate this. You and I have not previously met until today. So I appreciate being able to get to learn more about Chris Larsen and the work that you're involved with. And listening audience, we really appreciate you jumping in today to listen to another episode of the Freedom Point podcast. Look forward to having you join us on the next episode.
Thank you for hanging out with us today and for listening to the Freedom Point podcast, powered by Starting Point Capital. This show is for entertainment purposes only. Nothing said on this show should be considered financial advice. Before making any financial decision, please consult with a professional. This show is copyrighted by the Freedom Point podcast. Written permissions must be granted before syndication or rebroadcasting. If you're interested in connecting, you can find contact information at startingpointcapital.com.